Hello everybody, this is Tawfiq Shabi and welcome to the fourth tutorial on how to create a 2D knife head game using the Unity 2019. In the last tutorial we saw how to create our circle rotation based on the Z-axis. Today we're gonna try to create our gameplay manager and our game manager. So those two scripts will communicate between them to create our gameplay core and our gameplay logic. So before we get started, let's go back to our assets folder and let's try to create a new folder and let's call it prefabs. After that, all we need to do is to select our circle and drag it to the prefab part here. You can notice that the icon of our circle become more blue. Now let's just delete it from our scene. Now let's go back to our assets folder and go back to our scripts and let's try to create a new folder, a new C# script, and let's call it gameplay manager. Using this gameplay manager, we're gonna control how the game will behave. But before that, let's just delete the start and the update functions. Now, before we get started, let's create a new instance of this gameplay manager script. So let's try it with the public, then let's type static. If you are not familiar with the static types, I have made a tutorial for you to introduce the static types. You can watch it on YouTube. I will put the link in the description part below. So let's just type gameplay manager, the name of our script, and let's call it instance. Okay, now let's just define a new header and let's call it header, and let's call it circle settings. Okay, setting. Okay, now okay, everything is okay. Header circle. Okay, now let's try to create a new table. So public, we're gonna call it circle, and this table is going to contain our circles prefabs. So circle, and let's call it circle prefabs. Later in this tutorial, in this course, we're gonna be creating multiple types of circles. Now we have only the first circle we already made in the last tutorial, but later we are going to create more types and more different circles that contains more features. Now let's try to create a new public transform, and let's call it circle spawn point. So the circle, when we hit the play button, the circle will be spawned here. So let's just create a new empty game object and let's call it circle spawn point. Okay, now everything is okay. Now if we just create a new object and let's call it gameplay manager. Okay, now let's just drag our gameplay manager here. So for example, if we had one on the size here, we can just drag our prefabs here and let's drag our circle here. Then let's try to drag our circle spawner here. So our circle, what we are going to do is to create the system that will be spawning our circle here in this position. Okay, now let's go back to our script and let's proceed. Now let's just define a new range between 0 and 1, and let's say it's a public float, and this float is going to be circle width by screen. We are going back to see what this variable is going to do, so don't worry. Now let's create a new variable and let's call it of type circle. So circle is the script we already made in the last tutorial and we have applied it to our circle game object. So this is going to be the current circle, and this means this is the selected circle of our circle prefabs. Now all we need to do is to create a new start void. So let's type void and let's start. So delete the private, it's not private, it's not a private function, and here all we need to do is to create a new method and let's call it start the game. So start game, and now here let's just define our method. So all we need to do is to type public void and let's call it start game. Okay, in this start game we need to set up our game. Then so what we are going here, we are making the hierarchy and the architecture of our game. So all those voids will have some extra content on the coming tutorials. So now let's just type the names of our voids and let's keep it like this. So now let's just define our setup game. Public set void setup game. Okay, so in this setup game we are going to spawn our circle. And now let's just define our spawn circle. So public void spawn circle. Okay, now here all we need to do is to define a new variable. So this variable for time game object. So game object, and we're gonna call it temp circle. Okay, so temp circle. Then all we need to do, this temp circle is going to contain the instantiate and we need to circle. Then after this we need to refer to our circle prefabs of 0. So the first element of our circle prefabs table. Then the position is going to be the circle's spawn point dot position. Then we need to do the criterion, then identity. Okay, now we are okay, but before we proceed we need to refer to our circle spawn point, then game object. Okay, I will be going to see and to talk about all of it in details, but before that let's proceed with our code. So temp circle is going dot transform dot local scale is going to be vector3 dot trans. So all the position or the scale of our temp circle will be 1 1. This is what the vector3.1 is going to do. Then before we proceed in this code, let's just save our code and let's go back to our script folder and let's create a new C# script, and this time we gonna name it game manager. Now we have two codes. The first is the gameplay manager and the second is the game manager. So double click on the game manager and let's open up in Visual Studio. Now in this game manager, all we need to do is to refer to our screen height and our screen width. On the next tutorials and on the next chapters of this course, we're gonna be adding some new features and some new methods to this script. But for now, let's proceed with the screen height and the screen width. But before started, let's delete our start and update functions, and let's create a new public static of type float, and let's call it screen height. Then all we need to do is to define a get. So our getter will access will before that let's try to make a new condition. So if our main camera is different to null, so if it is different to null, we're gonna return main camera dot orthographic size. It will be multiplied by 2, else we're gonna just return 0. Okay, so our first property is finished. Then let's define a new public static float and let's call it screen width. And as usual, let's create our getter, and inside of it let's make our condition. If our main camera dot main is different to null, all we need to do is to return our screen height variable we already created, and it will be divided by the screen height multiplied by screen width, and else we're gonna return 0. Okay, now we have finished with our gameplay script. Let's go back to our gameplay manager, and here all we are going to do is to refer to the variables inside our gameplay manager, our game manager. So here, after we did this, let's go back and let's create a new float. We call it circle, for example scale. This will be good. So equal to our game manager dot, we're gonna access to our screen width, and it will be multiplied by the circle width by screen. We already talked about on the top, so divided by the top circle dot get component, and the component we are looking for is our sprite render. Sprite render dot bounds dot size, and we're gonna access to the x variable, so it's okay. Now let's refer to our temp circle and let's access to its transform, then let's access to its local scale, and this is going to be vector 3.1, and it will be multiplied by 2. Okay, now we need to access our lean tween. Lean tween we already talked about on the last tutorial. Dot scale, and this time we're gonna use the scale, not the scale x or y, just the scale. And inside of it, let's temp circle, then let's create a new constructor of type vector 3, and inside of it we need to access our circle scale, then circle scale again, and then we need to go to the circle scale. Then this is the game object we're gonna scale, and this is the new scale we need to have, and this is the time amount is going to take to change the new scale. Then we need to add a new easing methods, and it's called set ease out bounce. Okay, now let's go back and let's access our current circle, and it's going to be a temp circle dot get component, and the component we are looking for is the circle script. Okay, now let's save and let's go back. Let's save and let's go back to our game manager script, and we hit the play button, our circle will be instantiated in this position. And what position? It's the circle spawn point. In the next tutorial, we're gonna see how to define and how to create our knives. Thanks for being a part of our course. Good night. Don't forget to subscribe, guys, for more content.